You're now listening to the Peach Pundit Podcast, where we are expressing our own personal opinions. These views may not reflect the opinions of those whom we may be professionally affiliated. Excuse me while I rock out to Jason Pye's custom bumper music.
If I had hair, I'd
You
bang
are
my
now
head.
listening to the Peach Pundit Podcast, where we are expressing our own personal opinions without Jason Pye this week. It's just me, Scott Turner, my friend Buzz Brockway. Buzz, how are you?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you doing?
So you're up in Nashville with all them conservatives up there getting all the world's problems solved?
Exactly. The Heritage Resource Bank.
That's why you
big
have
conference. Lots of fired up folks up here.
Well, while you're up there in Nashville, in the foreign lands, down here in Georgia, Donald Trump continues to wreak havoc in Georgia Republican politics by posting yesterday an article by a woman who describes herself as an independent journalist who used to work for Newsmax, who used to work for One America News. Mm-hmm. Apparently, they're too far left for her, so she's now an independent journalist. Her name is Emerald Robinson, and she wrote a blog post that says something stinks in Georgia, where she made some hellacious, salacious, and flat-out false claims about the election results for May 24th primary.
Yeah.
Among those claims that she made was that Patrick Witt, the erstwhile candidate for insurance commissioner for the Republican nomination in Georgia, received the identical percentage of votes in 122 counties in Georgia. Now, this is something that can be checked. This is something that can be verified. It took me 12 and a half minutes to pull up the spreadsheet from the results, the official results of the election, and look at each county one by one and find that that's nowhere close to being true.
Right. Well, were there any two counties where he received the same percentage?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. So if you want to read about it, it's over at peachpundit.com. I put a blog post about it up, and I actually went through every single – I created a chart. In some counties, he received 8%, and the range goes up to 25%. From 8 to 25% in various counties.
Yeah.
And so the number of counties he received 8% were 2. In 3 counties he received 10%. In 10 counties he received 11%. And it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
The biggest number of counties that had the same number were 20 counties at 13%.
Yeah.
The second highest were 19 counties at 17%. So no matter how you combine these numbers, it's just not true.
Yeah.
And it's verifiably false, right?
Yeah.
But that's okay by Trump. He went ahead and posted it on his Save America website. And she makes some other claims. Have you ever heard of this lady, Emerald Robinson, Buzz?
I have, actually.
Do you know much about her?
I have. She was, in the moments after the November 2020 election, she was out there with all sorts of bizarre claims and allegations, couched as news. So yes, this is in keeping with her from what my exposure to her.
Her very first claim, which she italicized for emphasis in her article, is that the Trump endorsement is the single most powerful force in the universe of American politics. And she points to that as the number one reason why there must have been fraud.
It's the Thanos with all the infinity stones of political endorsements. Come on.
Trump can snap his fingers and half of the Republicans just like that disappear.
Exactly.
And that's pretty much what happened to our 2 Senate races, yes. As a matter of fact. Which I think is silly, right?
Yeah.
Because obviously the most powerful force in American politics is incumbency advantage, which was proven out. It's stronger than the endorsement of Donald Trump, clearly. Because
right, and we've seen that in other states, right? I mean, we've seen that in other states. Right. Trump endorsed candidates against the governor of Nebraska, the governor of Idaho, the governor of Ohio, all flamed out, and just as they did against incumbents here in Georgia. So,
right, it's incumbency advantage is the real key.
Yeah,
and incumbency advantage trumps an endorsement.
Yeah,
I mean, to turn a phrase. But she went on. She made some rather really kind of colorful claims. She said that nobody wins with 74% of the vote. Nobody. It just doesn't happen in American politics. Jamie Dupree was on this. The former Cox media reporter. I guess he's now independent up in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie Dupree is famous. If you don't know who he is,
good
shame
reporter.
on you.
Yep.
But yeah, excellent reporter. But Jamie Dupree's never voted in an election, so he can never be accused of voting for one side or the other.
Right.
But he's been very critical of Trump. And in his observation was Trump won the presidential primary in Montana with 74% of the vote.
Yeah.
For me, I pointed to Sonny Perdue.
Scott, remember our friend Terry England, as I recall, he topped 90%. He had a primary challenge against a Tea Party challenger, and it was something like 91-9 or something like that. So.
It was 91 plus to 8 plus.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember that very clearly because I've had many conversations with a lady who ran against him after that, trying to say that you try to encourage her that maybe that wasn't the way you get involved, but there are other ways for her to get involved, and she has her own internet talk show now, and she's a big Trump fan.
Yes.
But Sonny Perdue here in Georgia got 88% when he ran for re-election against a guy named Ray McBarry.
Yep.
Well, 16 years ago now.
Yeah.
And then she posted a photo of the Mike Pence event, which I was at, by the way, and saying that only 100 people were there. That's ridiculous. There were several hundred people there. I wouldn't say there were 1,000 people there. I'd say it was closer to 1,000 than it was to 100.
Yeah.
And that might be a slight exaggeration, probably like 500 people there, but it was nowhere near 100 people.
I guess the question is, were there more people there than there were at the Trump bus tour that John Fredericks and Debbie Dooley were riding around?
I can guarantee that. Yeah. Yeah. But the Patrick Witt thing was like the most verifiably false claim. But the sad part about that is that's what I'm seeing people repeat on social media is how can you have that number of identical counties? It just doesn't happen. It's mathematically impossible.
Yep.
Well, because it didn't happen.
Yep.
Like take some time to research it.
It's all
before you post it.
It's all right there. Public information, easy to find and obtain.
Right. And then she points to some polls that were done, the Trafalgar poll.
Yeah.
She pointed to the Insider Advantage poll, which we've talked about here on the podcast, is, with that Insider Advantage was openly cheering.
Yeah. And look,
for Perdue, hoping he would win.
Trafalgar's an interesting guy, and he, like lots of pollsters, they're right one election, they get really hot and everybody's popular, and then they're wrong again because polling is really tough. And that's where Trafalgar is. They were really close in 2018, I guess it was. They became the hot thing in conservative circles, and in 2020 they were way off. And obviously they were off, but everyone is off. I mean, even guys that have a really good track record in Georgia, like Mark Roundtree, Landmark Communications, he had him at 60%, and that was way off. Right, so all of them were way off.
It was 14 points off, but it was closer than anybody else.
No, absolutely. It was, closer than anybody else. But, I think, obviously things happened, and we'll talk a little bit about that pollsters couldn't really predict. Things happened in this race. Turnout was really high and other things that we'll talk about in a minute. But, but this is the thing. And am I correct, Scott? I think she also mentions that University of Georgia poll that was done some time ago that showed that if everybody knew that Patrick Witt and John Gordon and the others who were endorsed by Trump, if everybody knew they were endorsed by Trump, they would get many more votes. But that's the problem. These guys didn't have the money to let the world know. So if nobody knows, then, if you don't have the money to get your message out there, then you're going to have a tough time getting your message out there. And that's one of the things that happened to these guys. The other thing being that, Chris Carr and John King done a pretty good job. So,
yeah. Two things about that. One is that they didn't have the money and resources to tell people. But the second thing is the huge influx of general election voters into the primary process, not just the Democrats crossing over, which we'll talk about in a minute, but also the soft Republicans who vote Republican during a general decided, you know what, I'm going to go vote in the primary this time.
Yeah.
And they got engaged for whatever reason I think remains to be seen, but they got engaged.
Right.
And the turnout did set record numbers. Those are not fake people. They're real human beings who decided to turn out to the polls.
Yes.
And when you know this, because you've run campaigns, when you have limited resources, you're trying to talk to the people who are reliable voters.
Right.
And somebody who's participating in the general but not in the primary is not your target.
Exactly.
Because they're not reliably primary voters. So you spend your money on the reliable voters. Well, when the voter universe expanded, you had all these new people that never heard that Trump had endorsed anybody going out to the polls. They didn't receive the mailers. They didn't receive the phone calls. They didn't receive the targeted digital ads. They might have saw something on television if they watch Fox News or Newsmax or OAN, but not everybody does that who votes Republican, believe it or not. And so that had definitely something to do with it, I think.
And I think it also, Scott, I think it gets to this thing, M. Robinson's notion that Trump's endorsement is the most powerful force in all of the political universe. I wrote on my Substack, and I'm going to post it on Peach Pundit, but, we look around the country, we can see various things happen. We've talked a little bit about it. Trump's endorsement is worth something. And I think when the primary process is over, we'll have a pretty good idea of what it's worth. It's not worth nothing. I think we have to say that I think at least, and you can weigh in, Scott, but I think at least Vernon Jones does not make a runoff except for the Trump endorsement. But he did. Right. He made a runoff, and that's probably, he got a bump in support because of Trump's endorsement. J.D. Vance, obviously, it impacted his race and impacted Dr. Oz up in Pennsylvania. So Trump's endorsement is worth something, but it's certainly not all powerful. Otherwise, Brian Kemp and John King and all these others and Chris Carr would have gone down, but they didn't.
Right.
So,
speaking of Vernon Jones endorsements.
Yes.
Is the Trump endorsement as important as the Tom Kirby endorsement?
Look, that one kind of surprised me. Tom Kirby, for those of you who don't know, good dude, conservative guy, pretty good voting record, served in state house from the Loganville area. Scott and I were in the house. Our times overlap with him. He chose not to run again this time. And, of course, reapportionment happened, but most of his district is now the Republican nominee out there is a guy named Ray Martinez, who's an awesome dude. I was a little surprised when I saw that he was endorsing Vernon Jones. I don't know, Scott. Maybe they friendship kindled there while they served in the state house together, but I didn't think that Vernon Jones was a Tom Kirby kind of Republican, but hey.
He's not. He's not. Tom and I and Vernon was my seatmate, which I've said several times. I sat next to Vernon Jones, I think, for at least 5 years. He sat to my left in the chamber, and 4 or 5 seats down to my right on the same row was Tom Kirby.
Yeah.
So he sat on the same row, and so I guess there would be some interaction as you try to squeeze by people getting to your seat.
Yeah.
But that's about it. Tom Kirby is solid conservative.
Yes.
Vernon Jones is not.
Right.
And so when I saw the Vernon Jones campaign send out the social media blast that Tom Kirby has endorsed, I reached out to Tom and via text, and I said, "What the what?"
Yeah.
And I got no response from Tom. So I reached out to some other friends that live out in the 10th district.
Right.
And they asked me not to name them, but they pointed to bad blood between Tom Kirby and Mike Collins. And apparently Mike Collins has a bit of an image problem because he's kind of prickly.
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe I got the dates wrong here, but our friend Tom ran for Congress before he ran for the state house. And I wonder if it might have been that primary some years ago that Jody Heiss eventually won. Tom might have been in that race. So, yeah, that makes sense. There could be some some bad feelings there. So,
yeah. So that's what I'm hearing through the grapevine.
Yeah.
We'll see if the Tom Kirby endorsement is as important as the Donald Trump endorsement. It remains to be seen.
Well, I guess
Vernon,
we can say this, Scott.
they're
probably going to make the Trump fans mad, but that wouldn't be the first time. Tom Kirby's more conservative than Donald Trump. So
I would agree with
and Vernon Jones. Vernon Jones and Donald Trump combined. Tom Kirby's more conservative than those two guys.
Yeah, he is. This is a man who once was asked if a bill that he had introduced to prevent experimentation on human genes was an effort to prevent the creation of a unicorn or a mermaid. And he looked seriously into the camera and said, "You shouldn't be doing that."
He's not wrong. I mean, we shouldn't be.
Well, it was actually a minotaur. It wasn't a unicorn. It was a minotaur. They asked him if he was trying to prevent the creation of minotaurs. After that, there were cameras on the floor of the house everywhere he went. And I was standing next to him, and he's like, "Is that camera here for you?" I was like, "No, that camera's here for you, minotaur boy."
Well, hey, look, if Noah didn't put him on the ark, then we don't need to be recreating them, okay?
So if Vernon Jones does win his seat in Congress as a result of his race, it will be because Tom Kirby. And I'm going to give Tom Kirby the blame and the credit for that if and when it happens. Oh, boy. Other crazy things happening in Georgia since you've been away up there, man.
Yeah.
Kandiss Taylor makes headlines again. Dr. Kandiss Taylor refuses to concede because she said she had 60,000 people volunteering for her campaign, and yet somehow she only received 40,000 votes, and that's just not possible.
All right. So who is the person who told Dr. Kandiss Taylor that she had 60,000 volunteers? I mean, this sounds like grifters getting grifted to me. I mean, do presidential campaigns have 60,000? If we break it down nationally, that's thousands and thousands of people in thousands and thousands of people in each state. And I don't know that presidential campaigns would wind up with 60,000 volunteers. So this is preposterous, and honestly, it makes me question how in the world this person, Dr. Kandiss Taylor, was ever teaching our kids, and scares me. So,
yeah, basically over 0.5% of the population of Georgia would have had to be working. For her campaign.
I never did. You ever get contacted by anybody, a volunteer from Dr. Kandiss Taylor's campaign?
The only people I saw physically working for her campaign were people waving her signs at Kemp events, which seems like a waste of resources to me. But they would stand outside of a Kemp event waving the Kandiss Taylor signs, and it's like, these people are already committed to Kemp. What are you? You're not going to convert them by waving a sign at them out in front of the event. So bless their hearts on that. But there are countries on this planet who do not have militaries of 60,000 people strong.
Yeah. There are many counties in the state that don't have 60,000 residents.
Right. I mean, the city of Holly Springs has 12,000 people, and that's after a 20% growth over the last 10 years. Let me tell you, I guess the crazy just doesn't stop there, Buzz.
No, it gets worse.
Because MyPillow has launched an investigation based on Kandiss Taylor's claims.
Mm-hmm.
And when MyPillow investigates an election, you know that we're only getting started when it comes to the crazy.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he'll hold another conference and stream it over the web, and say that he's going to release the packets of information that show that the votes all went to China, and then never actually release them, and then claim that he was confronted and accosted and almost beat up to prevent this release. So who knows what crazy will come next?
It's yeah.
But I think, Scott, we should move on. I think that Brian Kemp should just continue campaigning and not wait for the results of this investigation. I think we can put this one to bed.
You don't want to watch another Jerry Lewis inspired telethon of Mike Lindell hawking conspiracy theories?
I did log on. I had a friend who was just hounding me. You gotta watch this, Buzz. And so I logged on, put it on the background. The website crashed and kicked me out after about 45 minutes.
Too many people watching.
Yeah, that must have been. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the straw that broke the internet's back there.
So there's been a lot of speculation about how many Democrats actually crossed over, right? Because here in Georgia, we have an open primary system where you do not have to register in advance. Many states, like Florida, for example, if you want to vote in the Republican primary, you have to register as a Republican with the state in order to participate in the primary. Here in Georgia, you don't have to do that. You can show up so long as you're properly registered, legally registered, you can show up on primary day and pull the ballot of the party in which you want to vote. So even like libertarians who don't get a primary, they'll participate and they'll pull a Republican or a Democrat ballot because we're still in a two-party system.
Sure.
And this time around, Monday before the election, a Monday a week before, so 8 days before, Mark Nisia, AJC, wrote a story where he had identified 16,000 Democrats
through up to that point in early voting. So
until that point in early voting. Right. Yep. So he had identified 16,000 people who had just a couple of years ago pulled a Democratic primary ballot. And this time they had pulled a Republican ballot. And then Patricia Murphy at the AGC followed up with them. We've talked about this in the podcast before. And on a very small sample, they told her the reason why is because they wanted to stop the Trump slate.
Yep.
And in one article I read, a Democrat who works out at UGA in Athens said that she felt icky about pulling the Republican ballot, but she did it specifically for Brad Raffensperger.
Yeah.
So the AP has updated that number, and I'm of the opinion that when Mark ran his story, he put the idea in a lot of other Democrats' heads around the state, it probably spurred additional activity on the Democrats' side, and they went out en masse. And the AP has updated that number to say that 37,000 Dems crossed over, and we've heard some conspiracy theorists say 300,000 Democrats did, but there's no evidence that we know to support that.
The Alabama cheerleader.
But the AP says 37,000 Dems crossed over. If my math is right, Brad Raffensperger needed 27,000 votes, or he cleared the 50% plus one by 27,000. And if all 100% of them voted for him, he is in the GOP nomination because of the Democratic crossover.
Yeah, right, and that's possible. I mean, that's believable, I think.
So,
so I think so. The data, Scott. I'm looking at the article here. This was conducted by an organization called L2. I've watched they're a pretty good group of data people. And they, in the past, what they have done is analyzed early voting numbers and looked at, what kinds of person. Obviously, you don't know precisely how people vote, even if they have a history of voting Republican or Democrat. You don't know exactly how they vote in primaries. But they analyze that data and say, well, X number of Republicans and X number of Democrats have voted in these primaries. So they're a pretty good data outfit. So if they say it's around 37,000, then it's around 37,000, not 300,000.
Well, There are activists now within the GOP who are calling for closing the primaries and moving to the Florida style system. And I don't know that that's a good idea. I used to be pretty supportive of that, but then I saw Denise Majette knock off Cynthia McKinney, and I saw Regina Quick get elected out of Athens. And I'm not sure that's a great idea.
Yeah. No, you're right, Scott. And actually, so funny story, that my first year in the legislature, I carried a bill on behalf of Brian Kemp, an elections reform bill. It included a number of things that had been included out of a blue ribbon panel that he had put together the year before. And so I'm presenting it on the floor of the House, and a Democrat named Rashad Taylor asks the question, "Hey, Buzz, can we amend this to close primaries?" And I said, "Look, I don't want to deny Democrats the right to vote for me because I know they love me and they would vote for me in my district." Everybody laughed. But I think, one other aspect of this is if you, every year there are, and I think you experience this in Cherokee, if you live in an area where your views, you're in the minority, you're a Democrat living in Cherokee County, or if you're a Republican living in a deep blue part of, say, DeKalb County or Fulton County, why should you be denied the right to pick your representative? And I know, having lived in the metro area, I talked routinely to Fulton County Fulton County Republicans, DeKalb County Republicans, who frequently pick up a Democratic ballot in order to vote in a Democratic primary to try to vote for someone they think, all right, we've got a group of candidates here. I'm going to vote for the one that best reflects my values, even if they only agree with me 30% of the time. That's better. So, you shouldn't just change laws because you're mad about something. There should be careful thought and consideration of this. And there's a lot of reasons why voters cross over from their preferred political party to vote in the other one. It's not always as pronounced as this, but it happens every election. And I'm not sure that we want to deny those people the right to do that. That's just my thoughts.
Here in Cherokee County, there is no Democratic presence. They have an organized party.
Yeah.
But they don't, they've only recently begun running candidates, and it's a huge waste of time and money for them because they get walloped 65, 75, 77% losses. And when I first ran for office, I was going through door to door in the Bridge Mills, one of the larger neighborhoods in my district. And I'm going door to door, and I'm going door to door to people who are reliable voters. Like we mentioned before, I was targeting people who vote in Republican primaries. Only this time around, I came up on, if there were houses that had yard signs in their yard for Republican candidates and they weren't on my list, I went ahead and knocked on the door because that's a good indicator they're going to vote, that they're reliably going to vote. So I came up on a house that had 4 Republican yard signs. Now, they weren't the conservatives. They were the more moderate to center left guys like Brandon Beach, who don't even represent part of Bridge Mill. They don't have a single house in Bridge Mill in their district, especially at the time. And I was like, well, I'm going to knock on this door because this person, I didn't know it was a lady. This person's obviously going to vote in the Republican primary. Knock on the door. Dogs are barking. Like, she had 4 dogs. She comes to the door. She says, "I know who you are, and I'm voting for you." And I said, "Thank you." She goes, "I got to go. These dogs." I understand. And I walked away. So I go down the street. I'm like half an hour later, she comes to find me. She got in her car. She came and found me. And she introduced herself as the chairwoman of the Democratic Party of Cherokee County. And she said, "I'm going to vote for you." And I said, "Well, you just told me you're a Democrat. This is it. Why?" And she said, "Because I don't have a choice for anybody else." And I said, you understand I stand for life. I'm pro Second Amendment. And she goes, "You're not the incumbent. That's all that matters to me." And I said, "Okay." She goes, "What, you not want my vote?" And I was like, "Well, I think you should probably vote for your own party. Don't you want to select your own, well, I don't, we didn't have Democrats running in our local races. So that was her one shot. Right. And I'll never forget it because for 8 years after that, after I got elected, she pounded me on social media as being too far right. And I tried to say, I told you.
Yeah, but she voted for you, so she has a right to complain to you. So,
but I tried to warn her.
Yeah, I mean, this. I mean, to me, this. Yeah, there's a petition floating around, and
Whatever.
I just don't. I don't think it's a good idea, and I don't think we should do it, and I certainly don't think we should do it because some people are butthurt that Donald Trump isn't all powerful. So,
for the record, ladies and gentlemen, Buzz Brockway on June 1st at 6:34 p.m. said the word butthurt. Well, one of the L2 folks who are looking at those data, one of the counties that they're not able to look at right now is DeKalb County.
Yeah.
DeKalb County. Hey, DeKalb County. The Democrats were up in arms because Republicans wanted to pass a bill that would allow the state to take over local election boards whenever they had problems or whenever they consistently couldn't get the job done, whenever they became an embarrassment to the state. And so DeKalb County, to this point, cannot certify their election results. And our friends over at Decatorish, Dan Wisenhut, go over to Decatorish.com. It's the city, Decatur, and then ish.com. Has a brilliant article. He's written a opinion piece that walks through step by step what happened here. And I have lost Buzz Brockway, but I'm going to keep on talking. Basically, what has happened is they don't know how to tally one of the races because one of the candidates dropped out of the race. They said that initially the machines were reporting a display error and that was the problem. And then they were reluctant to start hand counting the ballots. They started hand counting the ballots. That count finished yesterday. The elections supervisor over there, who has had zero experience before becoming supervisor of elections in DeKalb County, went to the media and said, we just can't do it right now. We just can't tell you if the count is accurate or not. So we don't know what's happening in DeKalb County. But go over there to our friends at Decatorish and have a look at what Dan Wisenhut has to say. And Buzz Brockway tells me that he lost us on the hotel Wi-Fi where he is. And so I'm going to text him back. So we're going to move on, though. We're going to continue on because there are several things to talk about still on our agenda. Even if Buzz isn't here to bounce off, I want to talk about a couple of different things with our audience. So I'm going to power through. We did see a tweet this week from Kelly Loeffler, who tweeted that that Georgians are done with claims of voter suppression. And, Kelly Loeffler, when she was in the United States Senate, did not support the objection of Jody Hice when he objected to the count from Georgia being certified for the Electoral College, and therefore the votes for Georgia counted in the Electoral College. So she has sort of a mixed history, but since then she's been very pro-Trump in a lot of her tweets. She has started this organization called Greater Georgia. Greater Georgia is basically an activist arm to turn out Republican voters. They consistently try to register voters, even in deep red areas. And Buzz is back, and I'm talking about Kelly Loeffler's tweet about Georgians who are done with claims of voter suppression. And and I've got to be honest with you, because some of her tweets before this have been very pro-Trump. So I'm getting a little bit of whiplash.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you have thoughts.
Yeah, no, that was an interesting tweet. And I think, Scott, you may have covered this. Sorry, I dropped off there, but hotel Wi-Fi sometimes is not as reliable as you would want. But yeah, I think I heard you saying that Loeffler's organizations work very hard to register voters, to get people out to vote, etc. So that's all great stuff and stuff that's been needed on the right on the Republican side here in Georgia for a long time, and so glad she's doing it. But yeah, it does run counter to the narrative that I don't know. Should we embrace the super MAGA term that that Joe Biden has talked about the super MAGA people? Because I think there's a lot of Trump supporters who aren't super MAGA, but they're more Republican than MAGA. So it runs counter to that narrative that Republicans can't win. It also destroys the myth, and it should be destroyed because there's no evidence that this is the case. Republicans have thought for a long time that high turnout was bad for Republicans, and that's just not true. It's absolutely not true.
Never has been true.
Never has been true, and there's no data anywhere that shows that. So we shouldn't be scared of high turnout, and the whole Stacey Abrams Donald Trump narrative that elections in Georgia are rigged or sucked or suppression and all of this stuff is just absolute garbage, and it's time to leave it in the past, and it's time to actually start debating ideas and policies and how we can actually do good things for the people of Georgia instead of all this other crap that these candidates talk about.
You know who else has been preaching that message of we need to move on from this voter suppression stuff? Herschel Walker.
Yes.
Herschel Walker, from the beginning of his campaign, has been saying, I don't want to talk about the stolen elections. I don't want, that's what happened in the past. I want to talk about what I'm going to do in the United States Senate for Georgia and our country.
Yep.
And I heard him say that with my own ears in February at an event for Faith and Freedom Coalition.
Yep.
And he's been sticking to that. But he said something this week which was more noteworthy and newsworthy. He said he's mad at Donald Trump. Did you see that?
I did see that. I thought that was very interesting. My initial reaction was, this is a sign that Herschel thinks he's better off running his own campaign than trying to run a MAGA campaign. That Herschel wants to, like Brian Kemp, expand the range of people who might want to vote for him. And the way you do that is you be your own person. And Brian Kemp has certainly shown the way there on how to do that, how to be your own person and stick to your own principles. And I think Herschel wants to do the same. And I think it's a good strategic move for Herschel Walker, quite frankly.
Well, the reason he said he was mad is because he said that Donald Trump never actually recruited him to run for U.S. Senate, which is news, right? Because we all thought.
Yes.
Trump told us that Herschel was running because Trump told him to, or asked him to, or however you want to look at it. And Herschel uprooted his life from his home and his businesses in Texas, and he moved back to Georgia to run for United States Senate. He hadn't lived here previously. He was a Texan for the last couple decades.
Sure.
And decides to come back to his homeland, his native land where he was born, to run for U.S. Senate. And of course, everybody here still loves Herschel, so he didn't need the Trump endorsement. He was going to win without it.
Yep.
And it gives Trump a win in his win column for endorsed races, I guess. But Herschel was an unstoppable force. There was nothing you were going to do to stop Herschel.
Yeah. I was telling a guy here at the Heritage Bank conference, a guy was asking me, does Herschel have a chance to win in the fall? I said, absolutely. I mean, and Scott, you see this. We're here in the state of Georgia. UGA is the reigning national college football champions for the first time since Herschel Walker led them to that. They are walking on air. Georgia fans, and there's a whole bunch of them in the state, are just walking on air. They feel really good about themselves, and Herschel brings all those warm feelings to them as well. Because he led them to the national championship. So absolutely he can win. And he doesn't need, as Trump himself said, they sing songs about him. So they,
I still have yet to hear that song, but I will tell you that Jason Pye and I went to a UGA football game in the fall, and we were sitting in the upper section in the end zone, and everybody around us were wearing buttons that said "Run, Herschel, run."
Yeah.
So it's a cultural phenomenon to have.
You still see people all these years later walking around wearing number 34 jerseys, UGA jerseys.
Yes. Absolutely do. Probably one of the best-selling jerseys on UGA campus is number 34 for Herschel Walker. And not everybody here is a Bulldog, obviously, right, Buzz?
Right.
But it does matter when we're talking about the zeitgeist of celebrity and politics.
Well,
And
I can tell you, Scott, during the primary, in the last weeks of the primary, I got a call from a fellow Tech alum who was putting a meeting together with a different candidate for Senate and wanted me to come. And I went there, and there were a number of Georgia Tech alums. Some of them had played football at Georgia Tech, and they're like, "Man, we just can't bring myself. How can I, as a former football player, vote for Herschel Walker? Come on, man." So,
well, a lot
tough.
of those Georgia Tech football players turn out to be
position here, man.
Yeah, a lot of those Georgia Tech football players turn out to be big time libs. Taylor Bennett, who was a former colleague of ours in the House, played quarterback at Tech. Yeah, so they may not be voting for him anyway.
Yeah, I don't think our pal Taylor Bennett is going to be voting for him.
Well, Herschel's made a lot of gaffes, and I'm not thrilled that he didn't debate. I didn't vote for him in the primary as a result of that.
Right.
If he debates in the general, I'll vote for him. But if he doesn't, I'm serious. I can't vote for somebody who runs from a fight. How are you going to fight for me in D.C. if you won't fight for me in Georgia? Is going to be my question.
And that's
looking
the
for Herschel
that's
to
the
step
concern.
up to the plate and agree
I know
to the
that
debate
you and
schedule.
I and Jason, we've talked about this on this podcast. That's a big concern. Can he be on this battlefield? Can he articulate our ideas that will appeal to voters? And I don't know, man. That's an open question. That's an open question at this point. And I don't.
It is an open question.
I don't know. He can't run. I don't see how he can run the same campaign and just continue to completely ignore debates and public appearances. So
I agree with that.
Media,
I
guess I should say.
I do take a great deal of heart in the fact that on multiple occasions now he's expressed an opinion that's divergent from the talking points of the Trump campaign.
No, absolutely,
So
and I think trying hard to decipher a political philosophy that Herschel has, and I think he's. I don't think he's an angry person. His personal past problems, set aside there. I don't think by nature he's an angry person, but I think by nature he's a very friendly person, and and a compassionate person, and cares about people who need lifting up. So I think I think the commercials he's run and so forth, even all the way going back to his very first announcement video, were talking about trying to articulate the American dream and his desire to, that he lived it. He was blessed enough in this life because of his talent and his hard work to live the American dream, and he wants that for everybody else. So that's kind of the opposite of Trump's statement that the American dream is dead. So Herschel wants to revitalize it, to make it available to everybody and expand it. So if you can stick to that message, I think you're right, Scott. That's a positive and not a Trumpian message.
Yeah, it gives me confidence in that he'll be his own person. What he will say and do are the open questions, but there won't be somebody pulling his strings, which gives me a bit more confidence in him.
Yeah.
We had a terrible tragedy. There's no segue into this because there's just no way to segue into something like this. Terrible tragedy befall our country. Small community, Uvalde, Texas, where and yet another young man who was terribly mentally disturbed got access to weapons and found his way to a school and shot children and teachers indiscriminately. And again, as we saw in Parkland in Florida, the police waited outside. There's video now circulating of police handcuffing parents, police pepper spraying parents who were begging them to go in as the minutes slipped away. Mm-hmm. And the gunman continued to kill kids and teachers inside the classrooms of that school. As a result, there are a lot of Republicans today who are talking about measured gun control, proposals that are not going to appease Democrats at all. Mm-hmm. And among them was our friend Geoff Duncan, the outgoing lieutenant governor, a colleague of ours in the House, who sent out a tweet. And I'm going to read the tweet. And the most interesting aspect of the tweet isn't the tweet itself for me, but it's Greg Bluestein of the AJC's follow-up. These are Jeff's words. Like an overwhelming majority of Americans, I am ready to have a conservative and comprehensive conversation about changing the trajectory of gun violence and mass shootings in this country. Americans want elected officials to put policy over politics and find real solutions not rooted in campaign-style political rhetoric. We should all genuinely work together to focus on the most obvious problem, 18 to 21-year-old young men who are mentally unstable and carry out horrific acts of violence with no conscience. There's much work to be done. Greg Bluestein followed up, said, I asked Geoff Duncan if he meant he's in favor of opening a debate on new gun restrictions. Jeff's response was that the NRA and other groups have turned into paper tigers and care more about fundraising than policy ideas. It's time to let the overwhelming number of Americans have the conversations they are more than ready to have. Policy over politics, ! Buzz?
Yeah, I think the part that you read from Geoff, his initial statements, sounded to me like a description of a red flag type law, which a number of states have, and we took a tiny step toward that in the Mental Health Parity Act that passed this past year, and I'm actually kind of in favor of that. I understand that as all legislation, the devil's in the details, and how you implement that, because you still have to protect people's rights. But I think the things that we've read and things that we've seen, just the guy who went and shot, killed 10 African Americans in Buffalo was 18 years old. This killer in Texas was 18 years old. A number of these other mass shooters were very young. And so there is something going on there. There is I don't know I don't think the guy in Buffalo is a mental health issue. He's a guy who made a series of choices to partake of and become immersed in a hateful ideology that led him to go do what he did. But this guy in Texas, could be a mental health situation, or it could just be sound like he had a really rough home life, and that's not an excuse, but that leads to isolation and leads to bad choices, which obviously he did. So I think, we always, in a number of these cases, we look back, they go interview people who knew the person, knew the shooter, and this is, of course, what's happening in Texas. And there, I saw one young man who was claimed to be a classmate of the shooter, who said that, I know people are trying to claim that he was bullied, that the shooter was bullied. He goes, that's baloney. He was the bully. And I've seen reports where the shooter went around shooting people with BB guns just for fun, torturing animals. And every law enforcement person will tell you, somebody who tortures animals is going to hurt a human being at some point very soon. So I think what shocks a lot of people, and why I think we need to take a long, hard look at a red flag law, is when you have a situation like that, a person's doing very, very troubling things, but has not killed anyone or hurt a person. What do you do? Do you just sit and wait for something like this to happen? And I don't think we can anymore. So I don't know. I know that'll be controversial, but I think, we've got a problem. These guys, there's a pattern with these type of people who do this. They're isolated. They're incredibly isolated. Some of them embrace radical thinking, and it's as the guy in Buffalo did, and others have. But they eventually get to a point where they feel like the only thing left for them to do is go kill a bunch of people, and wind up dead themselves. And that's horrible.
The tragedy is beyond words.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to start by saying that I can't imagine, and I have tried, to put myself in the shoes of those parents, especially the ones that were waiting outside, because that would have been me, and I would have been there with my gun, and the cops would have had to use something more than pepper spray and a taser to keep me down.
Yeah.
As I try to put myself in their position, so many things went wrong beforehand. So many things. This guy shooting people with BB guns for fun, not punished or corrected properly. His social media was riddled with photos of him dressed in things that he probably shouldn't have been wearing. No intervention from anyone anywhere. Nobody to put their arm around him. Nobody to show them that they cared about him. And then the school itself, the police procedures, the school not being locked, the door being propped open, the ease at which he gained access to a school. There are a lot of things that go into the tragedy. Clearly, the man is responsible. The young man is responsible for what happened. Clearly, it was his fault. But there were a lot of things that could have been done besides taking gun rights away from the average American citizen, the law-abiding citizen, that could have been done to prevent this. It was preventable, 100%. And it wasn't because he had access to a gun. It was because he was messed up, man.
Yeah.
And we as a country and in our society right now, we're not allowed to call crazy crazy. You know, we do it cutesy here on the Peach Funded podcast because Kandiss Taylor's crazy, right? Kandiss Taylor's not going to pick up a gun and go into a crowded mall and shoot people.
Right.
That guy's legitimately crazy. We're not allowed to call people legitimately crazy anymore. You know, we get canceled. The society comes down on us for trying to be something other than inclusive. And the reality is we're not dealing with our problems anymore. You know, young people go through emotional changes that create problems that we don't understand as 45 plus year olds because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have social media. We didn't have all that cyberbullying BS. We had real bullies, right? We had legitimate people who were stealing our lunch money every day. So I always come back to this. I don't want to take away a right of a 20-year-old who is law-abiding, rule-abiding. I don't want to take away the right of the 20-year-old who's responsible and has done nothing to have their right taken from them because somebody else broke the law. Because the guy did break the law. Passing more laws, not necessarily going to help. Because these people will find a way. You're never going to get rid of guns. That's a pipe dream. You're never going to get rid of guns. The Democrats who are in charge of our country right now saying 9 millimeters will blow out a lung have never fired a 9 millimeter gun. That's my personal protection device. When I carry, and I carry often, I'm carrying a 9 millimeter. It'll hurt you. It will potentially kill you. It's not going to blow the lung out of your chest with one round. Not going to happen. It's just physically impossible. It's a piece of lead that big.
Right.
It's just not a large caliber pistol. So we get into this. This is where I know the knee jerk reaction is, well, we have to, because we're going to put politics over policy. Frankly, we have to be appearing as if we're going to do something. And so we're going to open this discussion about taking rights away from law-abiding citizens because somebody else broke the law. So, and Scott, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I get you, and I agree with you. We shouldn't take away law-abiding citizens' rights. Do you think I guess when I think of a well-executed and well-written, tightly written red flag law, we're talking about creating a judicial proceeding where it's carefully examined, and is this person a potential threat to society, where such that we should not allow this person to purchase a gun until that threat, that potential threat no longer exists. I mean, I think that's what I think of when I think of a red flag law, and I understand that it can be abused and misused to deny otherwise lawful,
Well,
lawful and citizens their right. So
I go back to the uncomfortable truth of why the Second Amendment exists, and like Geraldo was on Fox News the night of the event debating with Dan Bongino about. The founding fathers could never have imagined more than a musket. Well, here's what the founding fathers imagined.
Well, right? they knew what. Let me tell you what the founding.
Well, our founding fathers knew what it was like to go up against a government that they wanted to get out from underneath that was armed,
right,
with muskets,
vastly superior arms, right,
right. They recognized that. The reason why it was so important for the Second Amendment to be enshrined in the Bill of Rights was so that future generations would have the tools and the means to deal with a tyrannical government. Mm-hmm. That's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to talk about, because right now everybody wants to say, you don't need a gun. Mm-hmm. You don't need it. Why would you need a gun? And also muskets for some, let's just throw muskets in as the salt and pepper on this dish. You need a gun, maybe not you, maybe not today, but it is irresponsible of this generation to forfeit the right to keep and bear arms, because a future generation may need it.
Yeah.
They may need it, and I'm telling you, the trajectory that we're on, those days I'm not going to say they may be closer than we think, because things right now are really bad. And I can imagine what the forefathers probably could imagine, that a government would try to disarm its citizens in an attempt to maintain power over them. And the only means you will have eventually, that's the last resort, the very last one. Yeah, we have the ballot box, we have political discourse, we have debates, but it's the last resort to rise up and fight tyranny with everything you have.
Yeah. No, it's no disagreement for me on any of that. I think to me, there are two things that we need to. Well, one thing we absolutely need to do, because it's already the law. States are supposed to report crimes to the national database for background checks. There's a list of crimes that if you are convicted of one of those, then you lose your right to purchase arms. And states drag their feet for a variety of reasons, and some states are better than others, and some are worse than others, in keeping that database up to date. There are some mass shootings over the last decade or so that could have been prevented if that registry was up to date and those crimes, that information had popped up in the background check. So states absolutely, and the Department of Justice should smack states around who drag their feet and don't keep that information up to date, because that would prevent some people who have gone to commit some of these horrific crimes from attaining a gun. And I think it's important to understand. I was reading Jonah Goldberg had a long article about he was speaking with a gentleman who was an expert in this field of mass shootings and so forth, and these guys, even this killer in Texas, went to a gun store. So they're not. He wasn't. They don't have the ability. They don't have the knowledge to go and get one in some sort of underground illegal gun. They're going. Most of these guys who commit these horrific crimes are going and buying guns from legal gun stores. He passed the background check in this case, but some of them would not have passed the background check because they were guilty of various crimes. And so I think that's one thing that we should absolutely make a commitment to. And the Department of Justice, I think, could right now start cracking down on that and making states get those things up to date. And then I honestly think, Scott, I think we've got to figure out a way to keep guns away from these young men who are isolated and who might go commit a crime. We've got to figure out a way to do that, and while at the same time protecting the rights of law-abiding citizens. And
That's the problem. That's the rub. You can't take away a right unless somebody's committed a crime.
Mm-hmm.
And once they've committed a crime, you can take away their rights.
Yeah.
But trying to predict in a Minority Report style somebody's going to do something,
I understand,
is extraordinarily problematic.
Yeah.
And I understand that there are people hurting right now. All that is rolls through my heart and my head as I say these words, and I don't want to seem insensitive to it.
Yeah.
But it is gun ownership is so incredibly important, not just for your own public safety, for your own personal safety, but also for future generations' liberty. One of the things, like when I became a legislator, one of the things I became keenly aware of were the unintended consequences of virtually every piece of legislation that crossed across our desk.
Yep.
Every time we had to press a green or a red button on a piece of legislation, I was asking myself, how is this going to impact people I will never meet? How is this going to impact future generations? Not a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
And even when they're elected, they don't do that. Yeah. They go to the political argument. They want to be seen as doing something. They want to call for action so they can claim, well, I didn't just sit on my hands. Well, whatever the solution is, we live in the nasty world of liberty where some people do evil things, and you're never going to legislate enough to keep them from doing those evil things. But you should never, ever limit the liberty of somebody to protect themselves in the event that guy comes into the shopping center where I'm at.
Yeah.
Don't take away my ability to shoot back at the guy shooting at people in the grocery store.
Yeah.
Because I would be willing to lay down my life to stop that guy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have always been that way. When I was 15, 16 years old, I wouldn't have done that. But now I'm 46. I've got a family. I want to see them live. I would do everything I could to protect them.
Yeah. And I'm a gun owner as well, Scott. And I think, I think our only point of disagreement here is that I just think that, we need to carefully consider a red flag law simply because in these limited cases, these guys who are socially isolated, look, the ultimate root of the problem is, obviously, number one, there's evil in this world, and we have to acknowledge that, and that's something that we don't like to talk about. There is evil in this world, but there's also for these people who do this, their social safety net, so to speak, has broken down. They are totally disconnected from everything. And there is nobody who can pull them back from the brink, and that's a problem that we as a society have to deal with. And I don't know, there's no easy answers, right. And I don't want to take people's law-abiding citizens who do nothing wrong. I don't want to take their rights away either. But I don't know, these guys who fall through the cracks and have no connection to anybody and have nobody to pull them back from the brink of going out in a blaze of glory and taking a bunch of people out with them. I don't know. We got to figure out a way to stop these guys.
Right. Well, obviously there's a lot of debate that's about to happen there. And Geoff has expressed his opinion. I just happen to disagree with him. Not the first time, but
one of the beauties of a genuine free country. Yep.
Yeah, I'm a genuine policy over politics guy. Center for Politics from UVA, University of Virginia. Our last topic before we thank our Patreon donors. Our last topic is the UVA Center for Politics. Sabato's crystal ball has moved the general election for governor of Georgia from a toss-up rating to leans Republican.
Yeah. It seemed like it was moments after the results were known on May 24th, right? Just boom, we're moving this over to leans Republican. So,
right. Larry Sabato has on Twitter, if you follow him, he has this Center for Politics. He tracks various races around the country, almost every race around the country, at the statewide level and higher federal races. And he's notoriously accurate, but he's also notoriously lefty.
Yes.
And I
sure
think
it pained him greatly to do this.
Yes. That's exactly what I was going to say. As he's typing out the words, I can see his fingers wrenching up into his palms and his knuckles becoming white. And as his body physically tries to reject him typing out leans Republican for Georgia. But for him to do that is because he's trying to be intellectually consistent and honest, I suppose, because the momentum, the big mo, is with Brian Kemp. There's no doubt, right?
Yeah.
That the momentum is with us, not that he's going to win. There's still a doubt about that. We're going to work hard to make sure that he does, but the momentum is certainly there.
Yeah. And I think, Eric Erickson made an interesting point that in one of his newsletters that, now Brian Kemp, he won this election all on his own. There were no Trump endorsement. There were no this, that, and the other. Sure, some Mike Pence and others came down to campaign with him, but he won this.
They were late.
Yes, and Brian Kemp has demonstrated he's his own man, and he won this election on his own. And what Eric's point was, because of that, because of the breach between him and Trump, he might have a chance to win back some of these people who have voted Republican in the past but drifted away from the GOP because they didn't like Trump and didn't like others who were closely associated with him. Well, now Donald Trump is not closely associated. Brian Kemp's not closely associated with Donald Trump. Just the opposite. So, I think he's got an opportunity here to just do what he did in the primary, which is talk about, here's the things we did. Here's the things I said I was going to do 4 years ago. Here's the things we've done. And here's the things I want to do over the next 4 years. And he doesn't have to pay homage to anybody. And I think he's got an opportunity, while Stacey Abrams, the Stacey Abrams of 4 years ago has moved way to the left in order to gain this national following to set herself up for the stuff she wants to do in the future. Here's Brian Kemp. I think he can credibly run a campaign that says, I'm the same guy you elected 4 years ago, and I proved it, that I'm my own man, and I put Georgia first, and that's what I'm going to continue to do for the next 4 years. I don't care. I will stare down the president of the United States if I have to, because he did. Mm-hmm. To stick by what he thinks the right thing to do is. And that's a pretty powerful general election message.
He stared him down on more than one occasion, right? Mm-hmm. Not just about the election, but also about opening Georgia. Mm-hmm. When Trump wanted Georgia to remain closed, Kemp said, I'm sorry, Mr. President, we're going to do what's best for Georgia. In that moment, it would have been politically expedient for Brian Kemp to do what he was told to do by the president. Yeah. Right? It would have been easier for him politically to keep the state closed. And but quite frankly, he opened us up.
That's part of what Trump doesn't like about him, is he doesn't do what he's told. That's part of what Trump doesn't like about him.
Right.
A big part, perhaps.
I gravitate towards elected officials who are their own person. And with that, we're going to wrap up. Before we go, we have some people we need to thank. At patreon.com/peachpundit, you can join this long list of shout-outs, this growing list. It's not long, but it's a growing list of shout-outs. The people who've decided to be actual paying subscribers. The Peach Pundit podcast is free. It's going to remain free. We do have costs that come out of our pocket to develop and produce this show, specifically around software and additional hardware. We'd like to be able to augment our own personal investment in this with the people who are enjoying this enough to voluntarily contribute. So we have patreon.com/peachpundit, and we are up to five Patreons. They are Sam Thomas, Benjamin Hurst, Reed Powell, John Vestal. And here's the kicker. If you have been hesitant because you didn't want your actual name to be used on the shout out, you can join Red Kudzu, who is also a Patreon subscriber. Red Kudzu, I see you. Well, I don't actually see you. I don't know who you are. But thank you for your contribution. And also, thank you for setting the precedent that you don't have to actually give us your name to be subscribers and pay us $5 a month. I really appreciate you, Red Kudzu. I really do. Those guys, obviously Sam Thomas is going to be in the Hall of Fame of Patreon.
He was the trailblazer.
He was the trailblazer. He was the first. But Benjamin Hurst, Reed Powell, John Vestal, Red Kudzu, thank you so much for being Patreons of the Peach Pundit Podcast. We appreciate you. We really do. Ladies and gentlemen, that's been another episode of the Peach Pundit Podcast. I am Scott Turner for my friend Buzz Brockway. We'll catch you next week, hopefully, with all three of us.
Yep.
See you.